Hey, everybody, this is Josh for another episode of the Canadian Immigration Pros podcast. I am your host, Josh Schachnow, Canadian immigration lawyer and CEO here at Visto.ai. Very happy to be joined by Emily Lukaweski. Emily, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Josh, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm excited because, as I mentioned before we hit record, you've included some big immigration questions that we're going to be talking about on the show today. Many of our episodes, we like to pick maybe one or two programs, one or two themes, do a deep dive, etc., etc. What I liked when you kind of presented me with your ideas on what to talk about, these are number one, big questions, and number two, they are far reaching. We're going to talk about very broad Canadian immigration in general topics, which I think will be very, very interesting. So to kick things off, can you talk a little bit about one topic that you're interested in, which is the quote unquote problem one quote unquote problem we're seeing right now, which is the temporary residents that are coming to Canada, or maybe even the temporary residents who eventually get permanent residence in Canada. Are they staying? What's the situation looking like maybe in general before we kind of dive into the specifics? But what are you seeing in your practice? And the other part that I skipped is, can you introduce yourself? I was too excited about the topic. Can you start maybe with a quick introduction, a little bit of your background, your firm, all that good stuff too?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Emily Lukaweski. I have been practicing law. Gosh, I'm going into my 11th year now. I never thought it would be this long, but something's made me stick around. I started with the government of Newfoundland. So I started in government, and then I moved to a large regional firm on the East Coast, and mostly did a lot of business law there, a bit of IP, and immigration found its way into my practice. And I loved it. And it stuck with me ever since my first year. And so I've been on my own since on or off about the beginning of COVID. Came back to Toronto around 2016. And I focus mostly on immigration, but I also do a bit of general business law and employment. And it's the stories and the direct contact with people I think keeps me really stuck with immigration because it's always changing. And you're
I
really
mean,
with
especially since you started your firm, right? I mean, since COVID, it's been almost a tale of two cities. Like I've been practicing, I don't really do file work anymore, but I've been practicing for 8 years and it's been a tale of two cities. The first 4 years were like quote unquote the heydays of, Canadian
Yep.
immigration. Things were great. GTS, express entry, SUV. COVID hits and it's almost like a totally different ball game. So what are you seeing on the ground or hearing, Emily, from some of these clients? What kind of prompted you to come up with this topic of, what's happening? Are temporary residents able to stay in Canada? Are those who become permanent residents deciding to stay once they get it? What are you seeing on the ground?
Yeah, it's interesting. It used to be, especially before COVID. You're right, Josh. It was much more stable and formulaic almost. You could easily take a look at a client situation and say, okay, this is, I think, the best situation for you. It's going to strategy. It's going to be over a couple of years or shorter, right? But you can lay it out for them and with reasonable confidence say, this is likely to be good for you. You'll get what you want in the end, right? Permanent residency.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's always, it's never 100% guarantee for anything in law, but it was a little bit more stable. Now it's just like, with everything that's happening in the world and the way Canada has had to respond to it, coupled with everything that's happening internally, economically, the rising cost of living, just having to deal with like those pressures. I think that the immigration system has become kind of like I'd say a gong show, but it's tried to do a lot of things all at the same time. And it's made it a
Right.
little bit messier. So people, I think what I have found is people are not staying. It's and it's not that there's the promise that they came here for isn't there. It's just that it's a little bit, sometimes it's a lot harder to reach right now. And unless you have a lot of resources or a lot of good team around you to really, I think, help implement that strategy and help support you while you're all going along this journey, it can become quite difficult. And people do feel like they're not welcome or it's just too hard and too expensive. There was one study that came out, I think it was by the Conference Board of Canada and the Canadian Citizen Institute around November of last year that stated, I think it was around 20%, could be 15 to 20% of people who receive PR are leaving after they've gotten their PR. So after they've put in all that work, and it's too hard to find a job, or at least a job that pays them well, or it's too expensive. And they're finding that it's other places they could go. So I think Canada really needs to take that seriously because we we used to be one of the best and brightest, right? We could attract them from all over the world to come to Canada. And I think if you are thinking about it yourself, it's not that that's not necessarily the case anymore. It's just that it may not be the easy path that that you're hoping for. So does that make
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's
sense?
very well said. And to go on your earlier point, like I think the best example is express entry, where it used to be so much more predictable. And I just recorded an episode. I mean, today it's January 26th. This episode will probably come out maybe a week or two later, so there could be changes. But as of right now, there's been two express entry draws, all programmed, tiny draws. And I was doing a Visto show talking about it today, and people are like, well, what do you expect for express entry in 2024? I'm like, I have no clue, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, pre-COVID, you used to be able to look at someone's profile, do rough math in your head and give them idea of whether express entry is a good option or not. Now we don't have a best guess. Like you might as well flip a coin, right? So, anyways, I hope they go back to those days of more predictability. But anyways, I guess only time will tell, as they say. Emily, so what do you think? Is this more of like, so you mentioned the report, right? 15 to 20% of PRs are leaving. That's a pretty surprising number, probably to many. What do you think the problem is? And it's probably a few things, but is it's just so hard to transition to PR that even people that get PR are ready to leave? Is it housing? Is it cost of living? Is it all of the above? What do you think are the core drivers? And if you have any thoughts on like what can be done about it or what you would advise, aspiring immigrants?
So I think it has to do with all of the above, right? It's not just one thing. I think people work quite hard and they put a lot into moving their whole life, right? To another country. They've chosen Canada, right? To be their future. But it's you come as a foreign national, your credit score does not come with you, right? So it's hard for you to find a place to rent because you don't have a credit score. Landlords can't check your background. So you have to learn the tricks, right? Find a good agent who could help you find a landlord who's open to renting to people who just arrived in Canada. Be able to have references with you, right? Sometimes you'll have to pay a certain amount of upfront, right? I know just the rental market's tight as it is. So even people who have credit scores will be doing that. So you need to learn these tips and tricks, right? Get someone who can be a guarantor for you here in Canada. That's possible. And that makes your application more attractive. Um, how to get a car. You can't get financing, right? Without a credit score. So you'll end up knowing like how to get that lease, where to look for your apartment, how to find a job when you don't have Canadian experience, how to translate your experience to employers here in Canada. All of these are things that you have to be aware of ahead of time before you come. And finding, I think, a good immigration professional who has those connections, who is aware of the broader picture, can be key to helping you make that journey much smoother now that it can be so uncertain, right? So you know your plan A, you know your plan B. There'll always be uncertainties that arrive, but at least you have a better picture of what you're getting into and how you can handle it. So does that make sense? I'll say that a lot because that's sort of
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It's also concerning in a way because it's not a quick fix for IRCC, right? These problems that you're talking about, they go cross government entities, right? It covers immigration, it covers housing, it covers, automobiles and whatever that ministry's called. I'm not sure off the top of my head. But, settlement services,
Yeah.
jobs, labor, economic, right? All that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a shame, right? I mean, hopefully in all those departments we can slowly start making improvements, right? Because as you said, it's a concerning statistic to see, especially when you look at housing's very topical right now, right? I was looking at an article yesterday that a friend sent that had basically a chart of average housing costs by country adjusted for inflation and GDP and whatever. And it was like, showing Canada versus the US versus the UK versus Australia, like so a lot of the first world kind of, competing countries. And the chart was like astounding to look at how high Canada's housing has become. What do you like?
Yeah.
What do what are we supposed to do? You know what I mean? Barring, I mean, I think the low hanging fruit are change the zoning bylaws and stuff like that so it's easier and cheaper for builders to build, and then bring in more tradespeople.
Yeah.
But what else is there to do, or what else can we do? Like, and let me ask you this: what are you saying if you get a consultation with an aspiring immigrant from outside Canada and they're bringing up these concerns to you? What do you tell them?
Yeah. I tell them, I tell them to be ready. I try not to sugarcoat things too much, right? Because you don't want to get someone to commit to or be right in the middle of putting all these resources and energy into starting a new life in a new country, only to realize that, oh my gosh, I don't know what I've gotten myself. So I try
Right.
to. I'm someone who really believes in networking and connecting people. So I really do try to like tell my client, okay, this is, I think, the the strongest strategy for you in order to receive PR or to reach your goals, right, of immigration. Keep in mind along the way. These are all the things that you may need to think about. Here are people that I know in my network that I can connect you with. Here's websites, here's resources, right? Be aware of these things ahead of time. So hopefully it won't come as much of a shock, right? Instead, you can be ready for it. Because
Yeah,
I don't see it I don't see it going backwards, right? The world doesn't do that. Things will keep changing. Whether they get better or more unstable is I don't know. We'll see, right? But you have to be ready for that. So
for
that's what I
sure.
tell my
For sure.
clients. And then I try to
Well,
help
and
them as best I can. So
yeah, and I think that the reason, part of the problem that we've gotten ourselves into here that we're going to segue into in a second is that too many people have been made promises because they're not honest and transparent like you, right? And that's why we have the Canadian Immigration Pros podcast, where I only bring on regulated Canadian immigration professionals who are, providing good advice and legal services and stuff like that. Because as you said, you're just being honest and kind of setting expectations. I think one of the big problems is that for the last 10 years, for example, the international student space has just gone wild with people all over the world making crazy promises to anybody who will listen and sign up to apply for a school in Canada, because it means more commission for them, and saying, "Oh yeah, just take this course, it'll get you your study permit. Oh yeah, you'll figure out work after. Oh yeah, PR's easy to get. Oh no, housing's not too bad. You just work on the side, whatever, right?" So we had all these players, and it kind of set the stage. So I don't think we can be too surprised with what's happening here. So let's talk about this. With all that in mind, are we bringing in too many people every year? Whether that be PRs and or temporary residents, which are actually quite different, right? A lot of people just read the news and they say, "Oh, Canada brings in 500K people a year," because it just says immigrants, right? But just to kind of set the stage, immigrant in by the letter of the law really means a permanent resident, right? So that means Canada's approving roughly 500,000 permanent residents a year, but not all these people are coming from outside Canada, right? So just to kind of set the stage for those who may not be, fully with the nerdy lingo, but approving around 500,000 PRs a year, bringing in up until Monday, 600,000 international students a year, right? That's now been capped,
Yeah.
and hundreds of thousands of temporary workers as well. What are your thoughts there overall?
It's a complex answer, right? Because we need people to come. I mean, not only just because we like having immigrants at their our reputation. I know I like it. Growing up in Toronto, I gained a real appreciation for diversity. And so it's not just that we need immigrants, right? Because we do. We need them to help with our labor force, our aging population, right? Our demographics are not good. And it's the same with many other places in the world. They come 2030 or 2050, the only populations that will keep growing will be in China and Africa. So everywhere else, their populations are going to decline. So we need
China,
people.
China actually is struggling right now too.
Ah,
I don't know in 2050,
yeah,
but they're going through a crisis right now too. Maybe India because they have a quite large younger population. I don't know about 2050, but yeah,
yeah.
just keeping up with it right now. But yeah, it's huge global problem.
It may be India, not China. I remember when I was watching
Yeah,
Watching
you might have flipped
Them.
those.
Yeah, it was. I was focused on Africa 'cause I was so surprised at how much they had projected it was going to grow in terms of population. So we need our population will decline. We need more people, but it's also good for us, right? Canada has a reputation of being, open arms and welcoming. And I growing up in a city like Toronto, I think it's true, right? The amount that you learn, the appreciation that you have for other people and other cultures and um, is tremendous. And the amount that you learn is incredible. It's the only way I would like to live, which is why I keep coming back here.
And one of my biggest
Or
concerns too, Emily, is that like we're kind of, I think in the last 6 months, we're losing that love in the sense that forever Canada has been immigrant friendly, right? For the entire existence of the country, right? That's why the country even is what it is today, right? Because of immigration. And now, because of all these other factors, there's a lot of negative sentiment towards immigration within Canada that I've never seen before, right?
yeah,
At least since I've been practicing. So one of my big concerns is obviously our economy, our labor force, et cetera, et cetera. But one of my big concerns over the last couple months is that there's a lot of immigrants and aspiring immigrants in very tough places, largely because of the system that Canada built. And now Canadians are misinterpreting a housing issue as we're bringing in too many immigrants, right? And the sentiment towards immigration has turned a little bit more negative than I've ever seen. This is anecdotal, right? So take it with a grain of salt. But from what I'm seeing and hearing and comments I'm reading and TikTok messages I'm getting, is I've never seen so much negative sentiment from within Canada towards immigration. And I think it's a big shame. And I think it's one of the big reasons we got to fix the system ASAP so that, as you said, we can go back to when it was working properly,
yeah.
right?
And I think that we've been lucky so far, right? Because of our geographic isolation, we've been lucky to be able to pick and choose who we get to come to Canada. We don't have to deal with a lot of large population of people coming just because they're looking for a better life, right? It's not being able to control that as much. So, and I that could very well happen in the future with climate change and increased civil unrest, right? So we need to set the stage now to be able to figure out a system or a way where we can continue to welcome people because we need them, right? So are we letting in too many? I would be more inclined to say we let in too many too fast and we weren't ready for it. We weren't prepared for it, right? When you invite someone over to your house, right? You want to be ready for them to come. You want them to be comfortable and be able to, want to come back. So the same thing when we let people come into Canada, we don't want to, I wouldn't want to promise it, right? You want to make sure they can find
Right.
housing that's affordable, that it's a good place for them to come and, you know, build their lives, grow their family, get a good job, right? And make more than they would have where they were before. But we can't do that if it's uncontrolled, right? Or if we don't know what we're doing.
Right.
So I am a proponent in some ways of saying, okay, let's put a pause on this for a bit. Not because immigrants are or immigration is bad, but just because we need to be ready for it. And then once we
Yeah.
take stock of how we're going to do things going forward, then yeah, I think we'll be in a much better spot. So
Yeah, I think you put it really well. The only wrinkle I would add is we brought in a large amount and we didn't necessarily bring in the right types of people. And I don't want to get into the game of like who's more valuable than who, you know? Like is one person more valuable than another, blah blah blah, right? I don't want to get into that per se, but we have a labor shortage in certain industries. Let's bring in a bunch of people who can fill those roles, right? I think the big problem is we've been bringing in hundreds of thousands of international students into random programs that are usually run by virtual satellite private colleges, right, that didn't exist 10 years ago, and printing out college diplomas and printing out, business admin grads that then have nowhere to go work, right? Because there's no alignment. So I personally, I don't have a huge problem with the number per se. My big problem has been with the way we're trying to, or not well enough, aligning the types of students and skilled workers that we're bringing in. So if we can better align the programs with the labor market needs, I think it would make for a smoother transition. Let me make the question just a little bit more specific and harder for you. If you were Minister Miller, what would you do with regards to the international student cap? Did you like it? Would you change it? Would you raise it? Would you, reduce it, increase it, remove it? And the PR quotas, right? Right now, it's at about, I don't know what, 540, like around 550K per year. What would you do with those numbers? Would you freeze them? Do you like them? Would you remove them? Would you reduce them?
yeah,
What are your thoughts?
well, start with the PR. I can start with that one. I think it's a good idea just to pause. Similar to what I said before, not because we won't increase it again in the future if we need to, but just to take a step back and say, okay, is this working right? Are people being able to get the life that they want for themselves when they come here? And if so many of them are leaving afterwards, then there's something wrong there. And we need to figure out what that is before we tell other people, yeah, go ahead. Come on. We're ready for you. Right. But the student visa cap, I can see where they're coming from. I like the way that they constitutionally, they had to, right, delegate how that cap is going to be distributed to provinces. So they give it to the provinces according to population. The provinces will then figure out how they're going to distribute that number, right, of student visas they have up to the cap. Because the federal government doesn't have any jurisdiction over education. Don't approve who is a designated institution. It's the provinces that do that. So that kind of makes sense to me, right? But I think what they made a mistake in doing is they implemented this part where you need to get a letter from the province in order to get your student visa. And that's added a little bit of chaos to it. Like it's too fast, right? Even that's probably the main point. It's too fast. We don't know how to get these letters now. So people are sort of in limbo. We don't know how those caps are going to be distributed by the province. So now everybody's has even more uncertainty on top of the stress they're already dealing with trying to get a student visa, preparing for their life, to go to school in Canada. And I understand the need to react, but sometimes it doesn't need to be that fast. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I actually loved almost all of the moves that they made with regards to the changes to the international student program. But I agree, I was surprised and I don't know, maybe they did give the provinces a heads up before Monday, the 22nd of January. Maybe they did. I don't know. It seems like they didn't. And if they didn't and sprung that attestation letter requirement on the provinces, then I can only imagine how hectic those offices are right now, right? Because now, like you said, unless you're exempt from an attestation letter, you cannot apply for a study permit, which is kind of crazy. Now, at the same time, part of me was like, well, you know what? Good on them, because Minister Miller was warning them for months, right? And IRCC has been hinting at this for maybe a few years now, right? Like, hey, colleges, hey, agents, hey, aggregators, hey, consultants and everybody else that's in that industry. Like, you guys got to clean up your stuff. And they didn't. And so part of me is kind of like, you know what? Maybe this is a big, big wake up call that'll kind of shock the system and get everybody on the same page and working together, and like, you know what? We really got to get this right now, because God knows what this Miller guy or IRCC might do next if we don't behave, right? So in a weird way, I kind of like it. I am not in the international student space, right? I don't do applying to schools or visas or anything, right? We just build software now. But that was my thinking. I don't know. What did you think? Like, what was your thought process that Monday after you kind of saw all the news, or maybe on like the Tuesday after you kind of digested it a little bit?
Yeah, it was okay. I get where they're coming from, right? We need to sort of raise this in a bit. It's getting out of control. Maybe give it a week longer.
Mhm.
just like, let people prepare a little bit for it.
Yeah,
That's more
I can't
time.
disagree with that. Yeah. Now,
No,
Emily, let's the last thing I want to talk about here is, and hopefully ending on a little bit more of a positive note, because I mean, I do think it's a step in the right direction. So hopefully IRCC continues to take these kind of proactive, approaches, and as we've both kind of alluded to, better days are ahead. What do you think IRCC should continue to do or do as next steps, right? We've said, hey, there needs to be better alignment. Maybe there needs to be an adjustment. What are some things that we or IRCC or the different provincial and federal governments could do to improve the system and make it better for everybody?
yeah. There's one idea that I've had, and I wonder if this will actually work out, is I think that they they should, so basically what IRCC has done is they, over time, they have moved out the human contact in their department to the private. You used to be able to go to an office like 10, 15 years ago and have someone from IRCC help you with your application, right? You used to be able to get someone on the phone at the call center when, as an immigration professional, we're trying to get a hold of program managers or people who work at the embassies to talk about situations that, have gone sideways. And people won't answer us sometimes, just won't engage. So it's a lack of transparency that's causing a big issue. And like, what they need to do is sort of not bring that back in, because they obviously don't have the funds to be able to cover that, but work with us, right? Create sort of like a trusted designated immigration professional, right? I know we have the self-regulatory bodies like the LSO and the consultants have their own body that is supposed to be doing that, right? But I think we need something more than that. Something that tells someone who's looking to come to Canada, yes, this person, they have a stamp of approval. They've passed a test by IRCC, or they've done so many applications, right? And then network in between all of us. Right now, it's all just silos, settlement services and banks and relocation services and immigration professionals. Try to connect all of us so that we can actually communicate with each other and help people along the way, right? They don't have to do so much of the
Right.
work themselves and end up in sometimes quite vulnerable situations. So that would be my
Yeah, I mean,
ideal thing right
the
now.
the other thing that makes me think of is that is also partially a result of what happens when you let a program run free. in the
Yeah.
sense that when you go from having to approve 150,000 study permits a year to 600,000 a year, you can't do that. Like, what type of government organization can support that growth, right? Properly, right? So it should be no surprise. And maybe this is why, listen, maybe capping or reducing some of these quotas could actually be a good thing. Because if you actually think about it in your head, let's say 2023 they approved, I forget if it was like 550 or 600,000 study permits, right? That's just approved. So that means that probably another 2, 3, 400,000 were submitted, right? So IRCC has to process 1 million study permit applications. That's one application type, right? They probably had to process, they approved, roughly another 5, 600 PR applications. Now, PR applications probably have a higher approval rate. So let's assume, I don't know, 6, 700,000 were submitted, right? They do a couple million visitor visas a year. They approve, right? So they approve like, I don't know, 2.5, 3 million a year. So what does that mean? Probably 4 or 5 million are being submitted, right? So what's happened over the last 5, 10 years is an organization that might have been set up to process 2 or 3 million applications a year now is looking at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 million applications a year. And we've got all these new special measures and this, that, and the other. So you've got probably like not as many staff as you need, processing way more applications than they can handle, and way more types of applications that they've just been trained on yesterday.
Yeah.
So, maybe you throw COVID in the mix and there's a whole other discussion, right? Maybe we'll save that for another episode. But yeah, maybe there is a benefit to kind of slowing everything down and letting IRCC kind of catch up on the admin and hiring and training side. Tech is also obviously an X factor too, right? Are they going to start using AI a little bit more to help process? And I don't know, maybe one day you can chat with an AI agent that is more helpful than a real person agent. I don't know. Have you had any experience with like any of they started apparently processing a lot of the quote unquote easier, like the PGWP work permit extensions. They've apparently started using AI to triage those applications. Have you had any experience or any thoughts on that? Like, do you think that's a good thing, a bad thing?
I think it's the potential to be something very good, but as long as it has human oversight and valuable human oversight, not just, somebody who's looking at it. But AI is not at the point yet, I think, where we can trust it completely, right? Just look at ChatGPT. It's kind of like having like
Hmm.
a first year associate or an assistant, right? But you got to double check their work. So, and as long as they're overseeing it properly, I think it's great, right? And implementing it, but doing it too fast, being reactionary is not necessarily the best way to do it. I haven't had a lot of experience with it. A lot of the applications that I do and the clients that I work with, their cases are a little bit more complex. So they're bringing their businesses in and we're opening their business for them. We're bringing their family with them and we're bringing employees in over. So we don't do work a lot with AI in the cases that I do work with. But yeah, it has a lot of potential and the world is going that way, right? If we don't use it and learn to implement it, then we're going to be left behind. But I think
Yeah.
with IRCC, what they've done is they've let the system become driven by demand, right? And so there's no structure around how much comes in. It's just if the market demands it, then we'll just deal with it, right? So they have like you said, it was so well put. So many immigration applications coming in, and they don't have the capacity to deal with it because they just sort of let it just happen according to demand. I'm not being the most articulate right now, but I hope you understand what I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And hopefully they start going more in that way. I think they're going to have to. I think we're
Yeah.
seeing it with the international student space. I hope it sticks, in other areas. And yeah, I mean, to end more positively, what do you think over the next year or two? Like, I do think
Yeah.
the News Monday was kind of like, I don't know. I thought it was the best move they've made in a little while in terms of trying to clean something up
Yeah.
and make it a little bit better. Do you think we'll see more of that in the future? What's your outlook on the next few years in Canadian immigration?
I'm generally an optimistic person. So I do think that there's a lot of good hope, right? And like you, I think what came out on Monday is evidence that they're listening, right? They're 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 responding. I think it's similar to the announcement that was made last June at the Collision Conference, where they came out with a couple of unique and quite creative strategies around attracting tech workers. And you can see that with a lot of the different announcements that IRCC makes, whether it's for Palestinians in Gaza or Ukrainians or student visas, is they're trying to really listen and be responsive to what is happening. It's just happening so fast and they're silent. So they're not
Mhm.
really talking to other departments sometimes, right? Or to other governments. So if they could figure out that part, right? And I think they can. I think they have, they they've shown they're willing to work on it and work with other people, to other departments to get things done. So I think there is hope. I think what's key is that having to people have to get involved, right? People have to like you, Josh, you have to have podcasts like, right? So we get our ideas out there. We have to talk to our MP, right? And tell them what we think, right? Don't be scared to say something or to have an opinion and do something about it. Because otherwise nothing IRCC is not going to even know what to do. Right. So that sounds a little bit cliche, maybe. But yeah.
No, well, listen, there's cliches for a reason, right? As they say. I think that's a great note to end on. I totally agree. That's part of the inspiration behind the podcast, right? Is to get immigration professionals together, whom there are a lot of, right? There's thousands and thousands of experienced, well-meaning Canadian immigration professionals. There's also the opposite, right? But I think the immigration bar, both lawyers and consultants, there are a lot of great, smart, well-purposed individuals that can hopefully, have conversations like this that other people can learn from and benefit from. And we do what we can, right? So this was a great conversation, Emily. Really some big important questions that I was excited to talk about, and I think we covered pretty well. So I appreciate you tackling some big questions with us on the show here today. If anybody is interested in learning more about you or about your firm or getting in touch, where do you recommend that they go?
So my firm is called Novate Legal, and well, you'll put it in the show notes. I don't spell it. They're used to doing. So you can get to my website. It's novatelegal.ca, or you could email me at emily@novatelegal.ca. And yeah, looking forward to hearing from you and how I can help.
Awesome. Emily, thank you again for coming on the show. As she mentioned, we will have links to all of that in the description below if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform. Emily, thank you again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Josh. Thank you for having me.